Hi, my name is Silva Mertsola, and I work as a consultant at the governance innovation team at think tank Demos Helsinki. We are a think tank located here in Finland, and we work with different organizations like governments, agencies, cities, and companies in rethinking their structures, processes, and strategies so that they're better equipped to solve some of the biggest problems of the 21st century. Today, I'm going to talk to you about humble governance and why we think that that will be a good approach to solving some of the biggest problems of this century. But first, I will have to share my screen with you. At Demos Helsinki, we have for the past year, 2 years, been collaborating with, for example, the Finnish government in developing a new approach to governance, steering, and governmental problem solving. This approach has boiled down to what we today call humble governance. Let me quickly explain how we got to where we are today. So in 2019, Finland got a new government that has a very ambitious government program. Our current government has set out to solve some of the most complex problems of the 21st century. They are very willing to restructure some of the governmental processes so that we can have increased democracy and participation in decision making. They're talking about achieving carbon neutrality by 35, halting the decline of biodiversity, and creating a new program for continuous learning. So on the one hand, we have some very ambitious policy goals that really head out to solve some very complex problems. But on the other hand, we have some serious structural problems in our public administration and decision-making processes. First of all, we have a strong culture of infallibility, which means that the government is expected to hold the answers to the complex problems of today. When you look at complex problems, you may understand that all information and wisdom cannot sit in one institution, but it's rather scattered around in the system. Another problem is that we have a lack of systemicity. We have systemic problems that are dealt with in ministerial silos, creating a very scattered knowledge base within the government. And then thirdly, we have a form of institutionalized short-termism. Now, short-termism is very natural to democracies because political priorities are bound to vary between the governmental mandate periods. But when we're talking about complex problems that need to be addressed over time, we need to find new ways of making more long-term policy making than what we have today. It's in this context where we partnered up with the Finnish government in the Steering 2020 project, where our task was to see if we can find new governance models that overcome some of these very severe issues. Our proposal then ended up being the humble governance model. But before I go into the model itself, I need to quickly describe what we mean by humility in the context of governments. Now, first of all, instead of being very infallible and pretending to be infallible, the government needs to have a humble approach to problem solving. It basically means acknowledging that the government, our politicians, our civil servants don't hold all the answers alone. So we need to have a fallible approach to information that we have within the government. We need to be willing to revise our approach as new information arises. In order to do this, we're going to need to be humble in the way we collaborate with the society that surrounds the government. We cannot anymore centrally plan decisions and implement them top down, but there needs to be an ecosystemic way of collaborating with companies, with different parts of the administration, with the third sector. So we need to be humble in collaboration. And thirdly, and maybe most provocatively, we really believe that we need to be able to conduct humble politics when it comes to policy issues that require long-term attention. Humble politics means that our decision makers find mechanisms for collaborating with those who they disagree with It could be, for example, the opposition and giving them an opportunity to join in on some policy goal and to express their support to that one, even if you may disagree on other ones. And it also means that people in power are willing to share the spotlight when processes succeed. This is in our and how we see this is necessary for us to be able to conduct more long-term policymaking to solve issues like the climate crisis. The humble governance model is to a large extent based on Professor Charles Sabel's experimentalist governance theory. In the Steering 2020 project, we collaborated with Professor Sabel in taking his theory and boiling it down to some key principles that could then be applied in the Finnish policymaking processes. The governance model consists of 4 steps, where the first one is about building a political thin consensus. Politically, we need to find some sort of a consensus around broad framework goals. So decision makers need to be responsible for setting the broad overarching direction for a policymaking process, but they need to stay out of detailed steering when it comes to the concrete policy measures that are used to get to a certain goal. This comes from the fact that we don't believe that decision makers alone hold all the information that is necessary to find solutions, and hence they should stay at the strategic level and work there. Once you have a thin consensus around a broad framework goal, so towards a direction that and a goal that you wish to achieve, finding solutions should be devolved to those actors, often outside of government, who have expertise and knowledge and first-hand experience of the problem at hand. These societal stakeholders can be, for example, companies whose contribution is very important to solve a particular problem. And it can also be, for example, frontline employees who really understand the ways in which certain issues related to public service delivery really function on the ground. So it's about giving mandate to those actors who know best about how things work and having a system of devolved problem solving. Now, this kind of a system where you have a strategy, centralized strategy and devolved problem solving will not work unless you have very rigorous feedback loops. In the humble governance model, we suggest that we would use peer learning mechanisms as a primary feedback mechanism. That means, in practical terms, that you bring these societal stakeholders together to sit around the same table to share experiences about what works in different contexts and ask for them to report on their advances in this way. Very often, feedback mechanisms are bottom up. They're relatively arbitrary and they don't really give decision makers the right information that is needed to monitor whether we are moving towards a particular goal. But peer learning sessions and mechanisms can be used to ensure both horizontal learning, but also to ensure vertical learning so that information about what works on ground really travels up to central government. The fourth and very important component is a commitment to a revision of framework goals. It means that the information that stems from the ground really needs to be taken into account in political decision making. It can mean, for example, that you're willing to revise the framework goal that is guiding the whole process if we're seeing that it's guiding the process in the wrong direction. But it also means that there needs to be a willingness to change regulation and to change ways of working so that we can really enable these local level actors to conduct the kind of problem solving that leads to tangible results. This is what the humble governance model looks at the theoretical level. And let me give you an example of what this has meant in practice. A case that is very dear to me is the Finnish education system, which I have had the honor of being taught through. And as you may know, it's the Finnish education system is very known for delivering excellent PISA results and generally for being a very good system. What we have been studying is that actually some of the advances in the great things that have come through the education system in Finland are actually based on the governance model, which to a large extent follow the logic of experimentalist governance and humble governance. So first of all, in the Finnish education system, their decision makers, our politicians, set a national curriculum that include broad framework goals for primary education. So instead of having very detailed politically set goals about what people should be taught and how they should be taught, we have broad framework goals for the intention of this education. Then the implementation of a national curriculum is to a large extent devolved to schools, but also to individual teachers. So we have highly educated teachers who have large autonomy in implementing the national curriculum, the framework goals, how they see fit. This leads to a system where education actually looks relatively different in different municipalities because the contexts vary, the things that are relevant for students there vary, and the ability to conduct different kinds of teaching varies across contexts, but still the schools meet the goals of the national curriculum. In the Finnish system, we don't have standardized tests, but instead resources are directed towards identifying those students who are at a risk of falling behind at school. And these pupils who maybe have learning difficulties or other struggles, they're giving highly individualized support in their school so that they can catch up. And that's actually one of the secrets to the Finnish PISA results, is that the students who perform worse actually perform quite well due to this system. And then simultaneously, there are different peer learning programs for teachers so that they can learn from each other. Fourth, the national curriculum that guides the whole process is revised periodically based on the learnings that arise from schools and from teachers. So there's a constant dialogue which ensures that the national curriculum really reflects the reality in the schools and the surrounding world. This is in broad strokes the Finnish education system and how it follows the idea of humble governance. But to quickly gather things together, the implications that this kind of a humble approach could have for public servants are, of course, vast. The first one is structural, because we're going to need to institutionalize new kinds of processes to problem solving. We need to move away from the illusion that complex problems can be solved through top-down centralized problem solving. We need to move towards new forms of cooperation, which is exactly where public servants will be key in devolving problem solving, in modeling new kinds of incentive structures so that we can get the broader society on board in these problem solving processes. So cooperation networks are going to be key, and that requires new kinds of capacities for our public servants. And finally, and maybe even most importantly, we need to move away from a culture of infallibility. There needs to be, we need to allow experimentation, failure, and learning by doing, because humble governance is initially a problem that sets a problem, or it's a process that sets problem solving in motion, trusts people in the system, has very rigorous mechanisms that ensures that the system holds together and that information travels. So it's very much about learning by doing, and that requires quite some mind shift in many public administrations. This was all from me, a brief presentation about what humble governance has means for us, what it has meant in Finnish education. And if you go on to our webpage, demoshelsinki.com, you will see other case examples of how humble governance and experimentalist governance has been applied in different contexts around the world. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk and to hear about your experiences of similar examples in your governments and in your local contexts. So let's stay in touch. And in the meantime, have a lovely festival. Thank you.